This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. So picture this. It is the 3rd century, and the Roman Empire is, it's basically on the brink of total annihilation.
Oh, absolutely. Total chaos.
Right. Like, they are facing this terrifying convergence of crises. You have simultaneous invasions on multiple borders. The economy is completely crumbling. And, there's this endless series of civil wars.
Yeah, emperors were being assassinated almost as quickly as they could be crowned. It was a bloodbath.
Exactly. And then Emperor Diocletian takes power. He looks at this catastrophic mess, and he does what, honestly, is the most logical, rational thing a leader could do to save his society.
He restructured everything.
He completely restructured the empire. He doubled the size of the military to secure those borders. He massively expanded the civil service bureaucracy to manage all the internal chaos.
Right, he subdivided provinces, created entirely new administrative layers.
Built this vast, sprawling new apparatus of state control. And, the crazy thing is, it worked. The empire stabilized.
It did, temporarily.
But historians now point to that exact logical problem-solving decision as the very thing that guaranteed Rome's ultimate fatal collapse.
It's one of history's great paradoxes, really. The solution to the crisis became the poison that killed the patient.
Wow, yeah.
Because Diocletian didn't actually fix the underlying rot, He just masked it with this massive, crushing layer of administrative complexity.
And before you, the listener, assume this is just some dusty ancient history lesson, let's fast forward to right now, today. Look at the smartphone sitting in your pocket.
Or the software running our global banking systems.
Exactly. Or, honestly, just look at the endless labyrinth of middle management at your corporate job. We operate under this underlying expectation of relentless addition.
Like building a skyscraper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just keep adding floors, right?
Yeah.
More glass, more steel, more elevators, and everyone scans at the bottom, applauding how incredibly high it gets.
Until you look at the foundation.
Right. You look at the plumbing and you realize, wait a second, my smartphone app that used to just be a simple calculator now wants access to my GPS, it wants my contacts, and it requires a monthly subscription and a cloud server just to do basic division.
It's absurd when you really frame it that way.
It is. And suddenly, that towering skyscraper feels a lot less like an architectural marvel and way more like a giant swaying liability.
Because we celebrate capability, but we are absolutely terrible at calculating the hidden weight of all those solutions. We just assume progress only moves in one direction, which is upward and outward.
And that brings us to the real mission of our deep dive today. I want to warmly welcome you to this journey because we are going to explore a phenomenon that touches literally every single aspect of your life.
It really does. It's inescapable.
We are going to explore what happens when the very thing that makes a society successful, its complexity, becomes the anchor that sinks it.
We'll unpack how human societies solve problems, why everything feels increasingly bloated, and whether we're on a one-way road to total collapse or, maybe a brilliant reset.
It is an incredibly profound dynamic.
It is, because we are looking at a fundamental law of thermodynamics and economics here, one that governs ancient empires and modern software architectures with the exact same ruthless math.
To guide us, we have a fascinating stack of source materials today. We are anchoring this deep dive on the foundational 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, and related papers by the anthropologist Dr. Joseph Tainter.
A truly groundbreaking piece of literature.
It really changed the game. We also have this intriguing MDPI network model that abstractly pits laborers against administrators. We've got discussions on digital complexity overhang.
And, perhaps most surprisingly, we are taking a detour into a massive neuroscience study from the journal eLife on how our own human brains process fear.
Which I know, starting a discussion about civilizational collapse by looking at neuroimaging might seem entirely counterintuitive.
It sounds like a stretch, but the biological perspective actually provides the perfect baseline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because nature has been in the problem-solving business for millions of years longer than human civilization has even existed.
Exactly. When you are an organism in the wild, survival is your ultimate primary problem.
Right. And when you are faced with a life or death situation, say a sudden movement in the grass or an angry face in a crowd, your brain has a critical choice to make about how it processes that visual information.
And that choice really comes down to speed versus resolution.
Speed versus resolution.
This is where that eLife study led by McFadden and colleagues comes into play. They were investigating how the human brain processes visual threats. And this wasn't some small-scale experiment either.
No, they utilized data from the Human Connectome project, right?
Right, involving 622 participants. It is a highly robust data set.
But how do you even measure a processing pathway in a living human brain? I mean, you can't exactly ask a participant how fast their internal neural relays are firing while they look at a scary picture.
No, you measure the actual physical wiring of the brain using a technique called tractography.
Tractography.
Yeah. Imagine trying to map every single fiber optic cable running beneath a major metropolis, but without digging up the streets.
That sounds impossible.
Well, tractography uses advanced MRI data to trace the diffusion of water molecules along the white matter tracks in the brain.
Okay, and white matter is?
White matter essentially acts as the brain's communication highways.
Yeah.
It connects different gray matter processing centers.
I see.
So by tracking how water moves along these fibers, researchers can build a three-dimensional map of the brain's physical connections.
So they are looking for a very specific highway in all of this.
Precisely. They were looking for structural evidence of a subcortical route for threat detection. Now, to understand why that matters, let's look at the standard visual pathway first.
The normal way we see things.
Right. Normally, when you see an object, the light hits your retina, the signal goes to a relay center in the middle of your brain called the thalamus, and then it is sent all the way to the very back of your head, to the visual cortex.
Which is basically the brain's bureaucracy.
Exactly. The cortex is the massively complex, highly specialized analytical department.
It is the ultimate committee.
It really is. The visual cortex processes the image in stunningly high resolution. It figures out the geometric edges, the shading, the exact color gradients.
And it cross-references all that data with your memory, right? To determine the precise identity of the object.
Yes, but that incredible processing power comes with a critical cost, which is time. It takes milliseconds for the signal to travel to the back of the brain, get processed by millions of cortical neurons, and then send the signal forward to your motor cortex to react.
And if you're staring down a venomous snake, those milliseconds are literally the difference between life and death.
You do not need a high-resolution, color-graded mental image of the snake's scales.
No, you just need to jump backward.
Exactly. So what this study found definitive evidence for in humans is a shortcut, an ancient stripped-down pathway that bypasses the cortex entirely.
Bypasses it completely.
The signal goes from the superior colliculus, which receives direct, raw input from the retina, straight to a region called the pulvinar, and then directly into the amygdala.
And the amygdala is the brain's fear and threat response center. It's the fire alarm.
Yes, the signal completely skips the bureaucratic visual cortex. And the researchers didn't just map the anatomy, they actually tied it to human performance using something called a pen-to-motion recognition task.
Oh, right. I read about this in the source material. They had the participants look at a rapid series of faces displaying different emotions, right? Like happy, sad, neutral, angry, and fearful.
Right. And what they discovered was a direct correlation between physical anatomy and capability. Individuals who had denser white matter fibers in this specific right pulvinar amygdala shortcut were actually significantly better and faster at recognizing the fearful faces.
Wow, so their brains were structurally optimized to spot the threat faster.
Furthermore, by using dynamic causal modeling on functional MRI data, the researchers could actually track the direction of the brain activity in real time.
And what did that show?
They proved that this subcortical route is forward only. It doesn't ask for feedback. It doesn't wait for the cortex to weigh in. It just sees the threat and triggers the alarm.
So bringing this back to our larger topic today, why are we spending time on white matter tracks in a deep dive about societal collapse?
It's a fair question.
Because it reveals a profound truth about how nature optimizes for survival. When faced with a critical existential problem, the biological system does not default to its most complex, heavily layered department.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't ask the cortex to form a subcommittee and draft a comprehensive report on the geometric contours of the threat. It uses a specialized, low-overhead, hyper-efficient shortcut. It literally strips away the bureaucracy.
Nature recognizes that in a crisis, the most sophisticated solution is often the one with the fewest moving parts. Complexity is a luxury of safety.
That's a great way to put it.
When survival is on the line, simplification is the superior strategy.
And here is the profound, almost tragic irony in all of this. Our brains evolved this ruthlessly efficient, stripped-down system over millions of years. Yet when human beings get together to form a society, we do the exact opposite.
We really do.
We default to adding massive, slow-moving, incredibly expensive bureaucratic tortoises to solve every single minor problem we encounter.
We suffer from an inherent bias toward addition. And this biological baseline of efficiency serves as the perfect foil for what Dr. Joseph Tainter observed when he looked at the grand sweep of human civilizations.
So let's transition into Tainter's work. He's an anthropologist and historian, and his 1988 book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, it completely upended the academic consensus on why empires fall.
It really did. Up until Tainter, history was largely taught through the lens of external shocks.
Like bad luck, basically.
Yeah. If you asked a historian in the mid-20th century why the Western Roman Empire fell, or why the classic Maya civilization collapsed, or why the Chicoan culture in the American Southwest disappeared, they would point to a specific, dramatic event.
An invasion by barbarian hordes, a catastrophic megadrought, a devastating plague.
Exactly. But Tainter looked at the archaeological and historical records and noticed a glaring logical flaw in that reasoning.
Which was?
He realized that these societies had faced identical shocks for centuries and survived them perfectly fine.
Oh, right.
The Roman Empire fought off massive invasions during its early and middle periods and actually emerged stronger. The Maya endured severe droughts long before their final collapse.
So Tainter asked a fundamentally different question. Why did this particular drought or this particular invasion cause the entire societal structure to shatter when previous ones didn't?
And his answer forms the core of his thesis. Human societies are, at their absolute most fundamental level, problem-solving organizations. A society exists to solve the challenges of its members, distributing food, defending territory, managing water, resolving internal disputes. And how does a society solve these problems?
It does it by increasing its complexity.
Yes. I think we need to define complexity here, though, because Tainter uses it in a very specific structural way.
Right. He isn't just talking about advanced technology like having better swords or fancier aqueducts.
No, in anthropology, a complex society is one with high levels of differentiation and integration.
Meaning more specialized roles and more systems to connect them.
Yes. Think about a simple hunter-gatherer band. There may be a few dozen people. The roles are highly generalized.
Like almost everyone knows how to hunt, how to forage, how to build a basic shelter.
Exactly. There is very little hierarchy and no formal bureaucracy. If a problem arises, like a local food shortage, the solution is simple. The band just moves to a new location.
But fast forward to an early agricultural society facing a population boom. They can't just move.
Right, they are tied to the land.
They have to solve the problem of growing more food on the exact same amount of land.
So they increase complexity. They invent complex irrigation systems.
Yeah.
But an irrigation system requires specialized engineers to design it.
It requires a massive labor force to dig the canals.
And now you have people who are not actively growing food, so you need a distribution system to feed them. You need overseers to manage the labor. You need a centralized authority to resolve disputes over water rights.
It just cascades.
It does. To pay for the overseers and the centralized authority, you need a taxation system. To manage the taxes, you need accountants and scribes. To protect the grain storehouses from raiders, you need a specialized military class.
Every single solution spawns a new layer of organizational hierarchy. It is this relentless positive feedback loop. And to make this vivid for you listening, one of our sources, a writer named Boris Smosmas, offers this brilliant visual metaphor for this process.
Oh, the ladder analogy. It is a phenomenal way to conceptualize the precariousness of this progress.
Right. Smuss says, imagine civilization as a climber ascending a poorly built wooden ladder. You are climbing up to reach higher and higher fruits, which represent better living standards, advanced medicine, deeper scientific knowledge.
Sounds great so far.
But here's the catch. As you climb, every rung you step off of rots and falls away beneath you.
You cannot easily climb back down.
Exactly. Now, if you are a hunter-gatherer, you are on the first or second rung. If you slip and fall, you might twist an ankle. It's a local setback, but you'll recover.
The structure is low to the ground. It is inherently resilient.
But the modern hyper-complex society, we are 1,000 rungs up in the air. We are enjoying the magnificent fruits of quantum computing and global supply chains, but we are utterly dependent on that height.
Right.
If we lose the power grid or if the global shipping network breaks down, we can't just regress to farming our own backyards. We don't have the skills, we don't have the land or the tools. At a certain height of complexity, any fall from the ladder is a total catastrophe.
And what sustains a society at that terrifying height is what Tainter calls energy subsidies. This is the thermodynamic reality of civilization. Complexity is incredibly expensive.
Because the accountants, the engineers, the lawyers, and, the podcast hosts, none of us are growing calories.
Exactly. As a society moves up the ladder, an increasingly massive percentage of the population becomes specialized in roles that do not produce primary resources. They are information processors, regulators, managers, and elites.
And maintaining all of these non-producing specialists requires a staggering amount of energy.
And energy here is a catch-all term. It means literal calories, it means human labor, it means timber, coal, oil, and capital. It is the lifeblood of the system.
Right.
To put it in perspective, a traditional foraging society operates on an energy budget of about 1/20th of a horsepower per capita per year.
Just 1/20th.
That is the baseline human requirement. But as we transition to complex agrarian empires and then to industrialized nation states, our per capita energy demands just exploded. Modern citizens consume thousands of times more energy than their ancestors.
It's exponential.
Tainter's absolute rule is that energy flow and socio-political organization are two sides of the exact same equation. You cannot build or maintain a complex society without a continuous, massive influx of surplus energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If complexity is our primary evolutionary tool, and it has given us antibiotics and space travel and unprecedented lifespans, why does Tainter argue that it inevitably leads to collapse? Why does the ladder tip over?
Because human societies are ultimately bound by a fundamental law of economics, which is the law of diminishing marginal return.
Oh, the math of doom.
The math of doom, exactly.
I want to spend significant time unpacking this because if you understand this one economic principle, the entire history of the world suddenly makes terrifying sense.
In classical economics, a marginal return is the additional benefit you receive from adding one extra unit of investment. Whether that investment is money, labor, or in Tainter's case, societal complexity.
Yeah.
The formula is straightforward. Marginal return equals the change in benefit divided by the change in complexity. And Tainter's chilling observation is that over the lifespan of any civilization, this fraction inevitably trends towards zero.
Why? Because of the concept of low-hanging fruit, right? Let's look at the early days of a society's growth. When a civilization first begins to complexify, the returns on that investment are astronomical. The first few rungs of the ladder offer massive payouts for very little effort.
Take basic public infrastructure, for example. If a society invests the relatively small amount of energy and organization required to dig a simple central well in a village, the health and productivity of the entire population instantly skyrocketed.
Right, people aren't getting sick from bad water anymore.
Exactly. The benefit wildly outweighs the cost.
Or look at education. If you take a largely illiterate population and invest in teaching them basic reading and basic arithmetic, the economic explosion is phenomenal. Suddenly, workers can read manuals, merchants can keep accurate ledgers, citizens can read the laws. You get a massive surge in societal wealth for the relatively low cost of basic schooling.
But here's the trap. Eventually, a society harvests all of that low-hanging fruit. You can only invent basic agriculture once. You can only teach basic literacy once. The cost-benefit curve reaches a peak, and then it begins a long, agonizing descent.
Because every new problem the society encounters requires exponentially more expensive, more esoteric, and more highly specialized solutions, but those solutions yield smaller and smaller incremental benefits.
Let's return to Emperor Diocletian and the Roman Empire, which Tainter discusses at length and which is highlighted in our source interview with the McAlvany Group.
Rome in the 3rd century is like the ultimate case study in diminishing returns.
It really is. Early in its history, the Roman Republic's complexity paid massive dividends. They built a professional army and conquered neighboring territories. The cost of the army was high, sure, but the return was staggering.
Right. They looted the gold of Carthage, Greece, and Gaul and brought back millions of slaves.
The empire grew incredibly wealthy. The conquests basically paid for themselves and subsidized the citizens of Rome.
But by the 3rd century AD, the dynamic had completely inverted. The empire had expanded to its geographic limits. There were no more wealthy, easy targets left to conquer. They were surrounded by vast forests in Germania and deserts in the east.
The low-hanging fruit of conquest was completely gone.
Gone. Yet the empire still had to maintain its massive borders against increasingly sophisticated barbarian confederations. So when Diocletian faced this crisis, he doubled the size of the army. He doubled the bureaucracy to manage the logistics of that army.
But without new conquests to fund this expansion, where did the energy subsidy come from?
It had to come from within, from their own
Oh,
people.
exactly. The Roman state began to cannibalize its own foundation. They instituted crushing taxation on the agricultural class. To pay the soldiers, they began debasing their currency, the denarius, stripping the silver out of the coins.
Which triggered catastrophic hyperinflation.
The taxation became so brutal that independent peasant farmers actually abandoned their lands, fled into the countryside, and voluntarily sold themselves into servitude to wealthy, fortified landowners just to survive the tax collectors.
It was the literal birth of medieval feudalism, spawned directly by the desperate overtaxation of the Roman state. That is wild.
And here's the crucial point Tainter makes about this. Diocletian wasn't doing this to improve the standard of living for Roman citizens. He wasn't doing it to build brand new monuments or advance science. He was imposing this massive, crushing burden of complexity merely to maintain the status quo,
Just to keep the wheels on.
to just keep the empire from fracturing for one more generation.
They were running on a treadmill that was speeding up, pouring all of their energy just into staying in the exact same place. I want to offer an analogy for this that I think brings it down to a very human scale. Think about the process of cleaning a disastrously messy room.
Oh, a universal human experience.
Right. Think about the first 20 minutes of cleaning a room that looks like a tornado hit it. You grab a trash bag and throw away the garbage. You pick up the clothes off the floor and toss them in a hamper. You make the bed. In just 20 minutes of relatively low effort work, the room looks 80% better.
The marginal return on your initial investment of energy is massive.
The low-hanging fruit of domestic chores. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you want to get the room from 80% clean to 90% clean. That takes another hour. You have to vacuum, organize the desk, put away the books. The work is harder. The visible improvement is smaller.
Right.
But what if you want to get the room to 100% pristine, surgical level clean? You are down on your hands and knees, scrubbing the baseboards with a toothbrush.
Oh.
You are taking every single book off the shelf, dusting the pages individually, and re-alphabetizing them. You are pulling out the dresser drawers to color coordinate your socks. It takes 4 hours of agonizing, highly complex, exhausting labor. And when you are finally done, the room barely looks any different to a casual observer than it did at the 80% mark.
The benefit was microscopic, but the cost was astronomical.
Exactly.
That is a flawless encapsulation of diminishing marginal returns. Now, take that dynamic and scale it up to an entire civilization. A society eventually reaches a thermodynamic point where it is using up all of its surplus energy, all of its tax revenue, all of its intellectual capital, just to scrub the baseboards of its sprawling bureaucracy.
And that is why they collapse. Because if you are spending 100% of your societal budget just maintaining your bloated state, you have absolutely zero reserves left in the tank.
Yes. And this fundamentally changes how we should view civilizational collapse. Collapse, in Tainter's framework, isn't an overnight apocalypse. It is a slow, creeping, math-driven vulnerability. The society becomes increasingly brittle. It loses its shock absorbers.
So it can't handle a normal crisis anymore.
Right. So when a normal historical stressor hits, like a moderate drought, a minor border skirmish, a pandemic, the system can no longer absorb the blow. It has no surplus energy to mount a response.
The budget is maxed out. The credit cards are declined.
Exactly. And so the society involuntarily fractures. The central authority loses its grip, the complex trade networks break down, and the population disperses. The society sheds the complexity it can no longer afford to maintain. That rapid involuntary loss of complexity is what Tainter defines as collapse.
So if complexity is so incredibly costly and it makes us so structurally vulnerable, why don't leaders just look at the spreadsheet, realize they are on the toothbrush scrubbing phase of history and say, hey, let's simplify things. Let's cut the bureaucracy in half. Let's step down a few rungs on the ladder. PRX break 1. Welcome back to our deep dive into the collapse of complex societies. Before the break, we asked the million-dollar question. If the math of diminishing returns is dragging us toward inevitable collapse, why can't we just reverse course? Why can't a society just voluntarily simplify its bureaucracy and save itself?
To understand why simplification is so agonizingly difficult, we have to look at human behavior at a systemic level. In one of our source texts, a fascinating study published in the journal MDPI, attempted to do exactly that by abstracting Tainter's historical theories into a mathematical network model.
Wait, how do you abstract human political behavior into a math equation? I mean, people aren't exactly predictable algorithms.
You're right, but at a macro level, human systems follow distinct structural incentives. The researchers created a hypothetical, modeled society divided into two classes of networked agents: laborers and administrators.
Okay, so the laborers represent the primary energy producers, the farmers, the factory workers, the truck drivers, the people creating tangible surplus.
Correct. And the administrators represent the complexity overhead, the managers, the compliance officers, the politicians, the regulators.
And the researchers ran simulations where they stressed this model society with external problems, like a simulated resource shortage or a conflict.
Right. And as Tainter's theory predicts, the system responded by recruiting laborers and turning them into administrators to manage the new problem.
Which siphons energy away from production and into overhead.
Yes. But the absolute most critical mechanism built into this model was something called the ratchet effect.
The ratchet effect.
This is the crux of the issue. The researchers programmed the model based on observed historical realities. Once a laborer is elevated to administrator to solve a problem, they cannot easily be converted back into a productive laborer even after the original problem is entirely resolved.
The complexity becomes hardwired into the system.
Exactly. The ratchet clicks forward, but it locks into place. It cannot spin backward.
Now, a skeptic might say, well, that's just a rigid computer model. In the real world, human executives can just fire redundant administrators. We can dismantle useless departments. But can we?
Rarely.
Think about your own life, listener. Think about the company you work for. How often does your corporate headquarters decide to completely eliminate a managerial department because their job is finished, versus deciding to create 3 entirely new departments to oversee the old ones?
It is remarkably rare to see voluntary contraction in a corporate or government setting. And there are deep sociological reasons for this. The paper references the sociologist C. Northcote Parkinson, who formulated Parkinson's law in the 1950s. The law famously states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion.
But it goes deeper than just procrastination, right? Parkinson also noted that bureaucrats are structurally incentivized to multiply subordinates, not rivals.
Exactly. Let's make this tangible. Imagine a middle manager in a massive organization. Their prestige, their salary, and their perceived importance are directly tied to the size of their budget and the number of employees reporting to them.
Of course.
If this manager operates highly efficiently, solves their department's core problem, and realizes they only need half their staff, what happens if they report that to their superiors?
Their budget gets slashed next quarter, their staff is reassigned, and their own position looks entirely expendable. They are basically punished for their efficiency.
Precisely. So unconsciously or consciously, the manager invents new, highly complex problems that only their department can solve. They create new compliance forms, mandate weekly reporting meetings, and demand to hire 2 new assistant managers to handle the increased paperwork.
It's self-preservation.
The system is structurally, financially incentivized to invent fake work and expand the bureaucracy.
It's an endless spiral of costly rulemaking that produces 0 actual societal wealth. The paper calls it expanding elite bureaucracies. And there is a deeply political angle to this ratchet effect as well, which is explored in another one of our sources, the Arxis paper on digital de-escalation.
Yes, and I want to emphasize that this dynamic applies across the board, regardless of the political system. Whether a society is a modern democracy governed by the left or the right, or an ancient monarchy ruled by an emperor, it is a universal phenomenon of human hierarchies.
Right, it's just human nature.
Elites and decision-makers derive their fundamental legitimacy from providing solutions, stability, and comfort to the population.
Right. If you are a leader, your implicit social contract with the public is, I will make your life better, safer, and more prosperous.
So imagine a political leader who looks at the math of diminishing returns and realizes the society is overextended. If they run a campaign on a platform of radical simplification, saying, I am going to dismantle these 5 massive government agencies, lay off hundreds of thousands of administrators, and significantly lower your standard of living to balance our thermodynamic budget, what happens?
They get laughed out of the room, they lose the election, or, in ancient times, they get assassinated by the Praetorian Guard.
Exactly. As the Arxis paper notes, decisions must be perceived as being in the interest of those relinquishing power. If the elites go against the immediate desires of the populace by stripping away the costly comforts and complexities they have grown used to, the leaders instantly lose their legitimacy,
The public basically demands the continued illusion of upward progress.
even if it is bankrupting the system.
So the leaders are entirely trapped. They can't simplify without losing their power, and the bureaucracy naturally acts like a biological organism trying to endlessly expand its own footprint. The ratchet only clicks in one direction.
Which means the society is forced to continue climbing the ladder, adding more and more precarious complexity, even as the marginal returns on that complexity plummet towards zero.
Okay, we might be tempted to think this thermodynamic trap only applied to agrarian empires like Rome or the Mayans. We like to think that we, with our modern science, our global internet, and our artificial intelligence, have permanently escaped this historical cycle.
We love to think we're exceptional.
But let's look at the absolute crown jewel of our modern era, which is scientific innovation itself.
This is where Tainter's theory gets applied to the contemporary world in a profoundly sobering way. In a paper co-authored by Tainter, alongside researchers Deborah Strumsky and Jose Lobo, they didn't look at ancient pottery shards. They analyzed the productivity of modern research and development.
They examined data from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. We are talking about over 5 million patents granted between 1974 and 2005. That is a massive, comprehensive data set of modern human ingenuity.
And the general cultural assumption is that because we have supercomputers, massive global communication networks, and more scientists alive today than in all of previous human history combined, the rate of innovation must be accelerating exponentially.
But the data tells a completely different, almost shocking story. The productivity of innovation is actually steadily declining.
They found that it takes increasingly larger and larger teams of researchers to produce a single patent. In fact, over that 30-year period they studied, the number of patents produced per inventor actually dropped by 22%.
Which perfectly aligns with Tainter's theory of diminishing returns. The low-hanging fruit of scientific discovery has already been picked.
Exactly.
Think about the 19th and early 20th centuries. A single brilliant scientist, working alone or with an assistant in a modest, relatively cheap laboratory, could discover the foundational laws of electromagnetism, invent the telephone, or discover penicillin.
Today, the structural reality of science is vastly different. To make even an incremental discovery in particle physics, you can't use a tabletop experiment. You have to build the Large Hadron Collider.
A multi-billion-dollar, 17-mile-long subterranean machine that requires a consortium of nations to fund and a team of 10,000 hyper-specialized physicists and engineers just to turn it on.
The researchers refer to this phenomenon as the burden of knowledge. This is a fascinating concept. Just to reach the absolute frontier of a scientific field today, a researcher has to undergo an incredibly long, expensive, and hyper-specialized education.
Decades of schooling.
Right. By the time you finish your PhD and your postdoctoral work and actually begin contributing net new knowledge to the world, you have spent a massive chunk of your life just catching up to the staggering volume of information humanity already knows.
We see this most acutely in medical science. One of the sources highlights a deeply concerning statistic. Over a 52-year period, the productivity of the U.S. healthcare system, when measured strictly by its ability to actually improve life expectancy per dollar invested, declined by nearly 60%.
It's a phenomenon known in the pharmaceutical industry as Eroom's law, which is Moore's law spelled backward. It is a perfect illustration of the complexity trap. Moore's law, famously, observes that computing power grows exponentially cheaper and faster over time. But Eroom's law observes the exact opposite in medicine. The cost of developing a new prescription drug roughly doubles every 9 years, despite all of our massive technological advancements in computing and biology.
But why is that happening? If our tools are better, why is medicine getting harder to invent?
Because of the biological complexity limits. In the mid-20th century, we cured the easy diseases. We discovered antibiotics to cure bacterial infections, and we developed vaccines for polio and measles.
The returns were massive.
The marginal return on discovering penicillin was infinite. It saved millions of lives for pennies a dose. But today, the low-hanging fruit is gone. We are left fighting the incredibly complex, systemic failures of the human body, like Alzheimer's disease, advanced metastasized cancers, and autoimmune disorders.
Right, things that don't have a simple, single-target cure.
Developing a drug that can safely navigate the staggering complexity of the human immune system without causing fatal side effects requires thousands of trials, decades of research, and billions of dollars in regulatory compliance. We are spending exponentially more energy to discover drugs that often offer only marginal, incremental improvement in life extension over existing therapies.
Okay, hold on. I struggle to buy this entire argument, especially when it relies on patent data. I'm looking at a review of Tainter's book from the Astral Codex 10 blog, and they make a really compelling counter-argument about this.
Let's explore the counterargument. What do they say?
They ask a very basic question. Are patents just an outdated industrial era metric? I mean, look at the software revolution. Look at the iPhone. Look at the explosion of the internet. A couple of college kids in a garage can write a piece of code that scales globally in a week and fundamentally changes how human beings communicate. Software seems to have lowered the barriers to entry so dramatically that it completely bypasses the need for massive laboratories. Didn't the digital revolution unlock massive, unmeasured value that a simple count of patents completely fails to capture? Doesn't the internet blow Tainter's thermodynamic math out of the water?
It is a very robust critique, and we absolutely must question the metrics we use to measure progress. The Astral Codex 10 review is right, that patents do not capture the entirety of human innovation, and the digital revolution undeniably provided a massive, temporary surge of new value and efficiency. However, if we look beneath the surface of the software industry, the structural truth of Tainter's math remains ominously valid.
How so? Because writing code feels practically free.
It feels free at the individual user level, but consider the physical reality of the infrastructure supporting it. The days of a single programmer writing a paradigm-shifting operating system over a weekend are largely over. Today, creating cutting-edge digital technology, like designing the next generation of nanometer-scale microchips or training a frontier algorithmic model, requires the most complex, energy-intensive supply chains in the history of the planet.
We're talking massive scale.
We are building data centers that consume the electrical output of entire small cities. We are mining rare earth metals across 3 continents just to build the servers. The sheer capital and thermodynamic energy required to push the digital frontier forward is staggering, and it is concentrating in the hands of massive, bureaucratic megacorporations.
So you're saying that even the digital realm isn't immune to the complexity trap, it just hid the costs behind a sleek user interface for a few decades.
Exactly. In fact, the digital world might be the purest, most accelerated modern manifestation of the collapse dynamic. PRX Break 2.
We just established that the digital revolution didn't save us from the math of diminishing returns. So let's take Tainter's theory of societal collapse and apply it directly to the digital infrastructure that runs our modern world. Because when you look at software engineering at an enterprise level, you see the exact same tragic pattern that doomed the Roman Empire.
It is a phenomenon we can call the Silicon Age collapse. Within software development, there is a deeply ingrained, almost pathological cycle, the add complexity and collapse cycle.
We talked earlier about how governments never delete old laws, they just add new regulations to patch the loopholes in the old ones. Software engineers do the exact same thing with legacy code.
They do, and it creates massive structural vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
In large institutions like global banks, airline reservation systems, or government databases, you often have foundational legacy systems that were built in the 1970s or 80s using outdated languages like COBOL.
Which nobody even learns anymore.
Right. The original programmers who wrote that code have long since retired or passed away. The code base has been patched, updated, and modified by hundreds of different developers over decades. It is so tangled, undocumented, and poorly understood that everyone is utterly terrified to touch it.
Because it's a house of cards. If you try to clean it up and delete a single seemingly useless line of code in the billing module, suddenly the payroll system crashes and the elevators in the corporate headquarters stop working. Everything is invisibly interconnected.
Exactly. So instead of undertaking the agonizing, expensive work of dismantling the old, inefficient code and rebuilding it from scratch, what do software architects do?
They ignore it.
They take the path of least resistance, they build a new layer on top of it, they add an API, a new layer of abstraction, a modern user interface. They essentially encapsulate the rotting, ancient mess inside a new, slightly prettier digital box.
One of our sources, a piece from Continuations, makes a brilliant comparison here. They say that adding new laws and regulations without ever rewriting or deleting the old ones is exactly like accumulating technical debt in a software startup.
Technical debt is a very powerful concept. It is the implied cost of additional future rework, caused by choosing an easy, limited, or messy solution right now instead of using a better, cleaner approach that would take longer.
Just like financial debt, technical debt accrues interest.
Yes, it compounds over time.
I think we need a mechanical metaphor to really visualize how absurd this gets. Technical debt is like discovering a leaky copper pipe in the basement of your house. The correct solution is to turn off the water, cut out the pipe, and solder in a new one.
Right, fix it properly.
But you are in a rush, so you just wrap the leak in duct tape. It works.
Yeah.
The next year, the pipe starts vibrating because of the tape, so you build a wooden brace to hold it steady.
Oh.
5 years later, the brace is rotting, so you wrap the whole thing in a rubber membrane and install a specialized drainage pump just in case it fails. 10 years later, you have an entire room filled with scaffolding, sensors, and pumps, consuming massive amounts of electricity, all just to manage one leaky pipe that you were too lazy to replace a decade ago.
And that is exactly how modern banking software works.
Mm-hmm.
It is an inverted pyramid of complexity balancing on a leaky pipe, and we are building an entire global society based on this hyperconnectivity. Everything is networked. Our power grids, our financial markets, our logistics chains.
It's all tied together.
This makes our systems incredibly capable and efficient when things are running smoothly, but it makes them terrifyingly fragile.
What's fascinating here is how a digital system perfectly mimics the fall of an empire. An unwieldy code base eventually becomes so heavy, so full of obscure bugs, and so impossibly complex that no single human mind can fully comprehend how it works.
And just like Diocletian's Rome, the maintenance costs eventually consume the entire budget. The developers spend 100% of their time just patching security flaws and keeping the servers from crashing, leaving absolutely zero time or resources to develop new, innovative features.
The marginal returns hit zero.
And eventually, a minor stressor hits, a routine software update, or a minor hardware failure, and the entire system goes down. We've seen this happen recently with massive airline system outages, where hundreds of thousands of flights are grounded because a 30-year-old crew scheduling database finally collapsed under the weight of a modern holiday travel surge.
The only solution at that point of total failure is to scrap the entire system and rewrite it from scratch, a digital collapse.
Exactly.
So we have thoroughly established that we are sitting on a massive global complexity overhang. Whether we are looking at our convoluted legal system, our stagnating healthcare system, the hyper-specialized scientific institutions, or the fragile legacy software running our power grids, we are dangerously high up on Borsmas's poorly built ladder.
We really are.
So how do we avoid the fatal fall?
That is the ultimate question. If Tainter's math is correct, are we just doomed to repeat the fall of Rome on a global scale? Fortunately, Tainter himself and the modern systems theorists who study his work do offer structural pathways for a soft landing. It doesn't have necessarily to end in a chaotic, fiery apocalypse.
Thank goodness for that. Okay, let's explore these strategies for societal de-escalation. Strategy number 1, we find a massive new energy subsidy.
Historically, this is the primary way societies temporarily escaped the complexity trap. When a civilization reached the absolute point of diminishing returns, they occasionally lucked into a brand new, vastly superior energy source that suddenly provided the massive thermodynamic surplus needed to maintain and even expand their high complexity.
For the modern world, the shift from wood and animal labor to coal and fossil fuels was the ultimate unprecedented energy subsidy. It was a geological cheat code that allowed us to build the Industrial Revolution and support 8 billion people.
Yes, but fossil fuels are finite, and their environmental costs are catching up to us. Today, to maintain our current hyper-complex global society without collapsing, we would be at a similar monumental breakthrough.
Like what?
A massive global deployment of next-generation solar energy, or the realization of commercial nuclear fusion. If we can unlock a virtually limitless, fundamentally cheap energy source, we can mathematically afford the exorbitant costs of our complexity. We can keep paying the bureaucrats and powering the data centers.
Okay, but what if fusion is perpetually 20 years away, as the joke goes? We can't just cross our fingers and hope physics bails us out. Strategy 2 relies on changing how we manage the complexity itself, using algorithmic automation and open-source digital commons.
This is where modern systems science offers us a tool that the Romans and the Mayans never possessed. We spent a lot of time discussing the massive, crippling administrative overhead of modern society, the endless layers of managers, accountants, and compliance officers that sap energy from productive labor.
Right.
What if we could dramatically, structurally reduce the cost of that administration?
You mean using advanced algorithms to handle the bureaucratic sorting and information processing that currently requires millions of human hours, and massive salaries.
Exactly. If we can responsibly deploy highly capable algorithmic automation to cut through the institutional red tape, to synthesize vast amounts of information instantly, and to optimize the logistics of global supply chains and power grids, we might be able to drastically lower the energy and capital costs of our complexity.
We could essentially replace the expensive, top-heavy administrators in the MDPI simulation model with highly efficient, low-cost digital protocols.
It is a way to maintain the benefits of a complex society without the crushing thermodynamic overhead of a human bureaucracy.
It's a sort of digital pruning, a way to automate the scrubbing of the baseboards so human beings can go back to innovating. Which leads perfectly into strategy 3, which is perhaps the most difficult for us to swallow psychologically, but the most historically proven. The concept of resilience through simplification, often referred to today as degrowth.
We have a deep cultural bias against moving backward. When we hear the word collapse, we immediately picture a dystopian Mad Max scenario. Roving gangs in the desert fighting over the last drops of gasoline, total anarchy, the end of civilization.
Hollywood has certainly conditioned us to view collapse as the ultimate catastrophe.
But Cainter suggests a radical reframing. He argues that collapse is simply a rapid shedding of unsustainable costs. It is an evolutionary restructuring. It doesn't have to mean the end of the world or even the end of a culture. It simply means the end of a specific, overly complex, bankrupt organizational structure.
It is a return to a manageable level of complexity.
And the source texts give a phenomenal historical example of this strategy working out brilliantly: the Byzantine Empire.
Yes, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed chaotically and violently in the 5th century, the Byzantines faced the exact same crippling administrative costs, the same hyperinflation, and the same massive external threats from invading armies. But they managed a remarkably resilient response.
How did they survive when Rome fell?
They voluntarily simplified. They looked at the collapsing ladder, and they chose to climb down a few rungs before it tipped over. The Byzantine emperors abandoned long-established Roman traditions of government and society that were simply too expensive to maintain.
They drastically reduced their centralized administrative costs.
Instead of trying to maintain massive, incredibly expensive, professional standing armies deployed from the capital, they localized their military defense through the thematic system, relying on local peasant soldiers to defend their own regions. They shed the vanity projects and the bureaucratic complexity they couldn't afford.
They intentionally decentralized. They accepted a lower level of structural sophistication in exchange for thermodynamic survival.
Precisely. And by making those hard choices, by voluntarily shedding complexity, they allowed their societal budget to recover. As a result, the Byzantine Empire survived for another 1,000 years after the fall of Rome.
So what does this all mean? It means that maybe collapse, or at least radical, intentional simplification, isn't a failure. Maybe it is a necessary, healthy, civilizational decluttering.
It is like a software engineering team finally admitting that the legacy codebase is too broken to fix, turning off the servers and deciding to start fresh with a simpler, cleaner, vastly more elegant architecture.
It requires a profound, fundamental shift in our cultural values. We have to stop automatically equating more complex with better. We have to recognize that sometimes, as nature has known for millions of years, the most sophisticated, robust solution is the one with the fewest moving parts.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. From the white matter tracks in our brains, to the desperate tax policies of Emperor Diocletian, to the mathematical abstraction of human bureaucracy, and finally to the fragile codebase of modern software.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Let's trace all the way back to our very starting point, that elegant subcortical route in the human brain that we discussed in the first segment.
The fear pathway, the shortcut to the amygdala.
Right. Remember that when survival is truly on the line, nature's best, most evolved solution isn't to add a new layer of processing. It doesn't build a new committee in the cortex to endlessly debate the problem. Its ultimate solution is to ruthlessly strip away everything but the essentials. It bypasses the bloat to find the most direct, efficient path to action.
The ultimate simplification.
As our global society faces its greatest planetary challenges, from resource depletion and energy limits to institutional stagnation and the fragility of our digital infrastructure, we are standing at a historical crossroads. Will our legacy be that we stubbornly continue to build an endless, brittle labyrinth of bureaucracy until it collapsed under its own crushing weight? Or will we look at the quiet wisdom of our own biology and realize that true resilience means finally learning how to edit ourselves down to what truly matters?
A powerful, urgent question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I highly encourage you, the listener, to take these concepts and look at the technical debt in your own life, your own workplace, and your own daily routines, and see where you can start decluttering. We don't always need another app, another mandatory meeting, or another layer of complexity to solve our problems. Sometimes the bravest and most effective thing we can do is simply step down a rung or two. Take care and keep exploring.
Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.